The earth trembled just before dawn. The sound came first, like 100 horses breathing fire through the darkness. Then came the war cries, sharp and rising, slicing the cold morning silence like a blade. Martha stood barefoot on the porch, her lantern flickering in the wind, hands shaking around the rifle she barely knew how to fire. The Comanche riders appeared like ghosts through the fog, 50 strong, their faces painted in streaks of crimson and ash. At their front rode a man wrapped in wolf pelts, his stare locked straight onto her. He raised a hand. The others stopped. Time froze. And then she saw it. Behind him on a painted horse rode the boy she thought she had saved. But was this salvation or betrayal? Before we jump back into how it all began, introduce yourself and tell me where you're tuning in from. I love hearing your stories, too. And if this one touches your heart or keeps you on the edge of your seat, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. There was dust in everything. In the seams of the porchwood, in the space between the pages of her worn-out Bible, and even in the folds of the single dress she wore most days. Dark blue with fraying sleeves, the wind carried it daily from the west, dry and full of whispers like it had somewhere to be and too many secrets to keep. Martha lived on the edge of a town that didn't want her. A cracked shingle roof and a leaning fence. 30 paces past. The old church bell that no longer rang. She kept to herself. Not out of choice, but because the townfolk made sure she knew she was not welcome. They said she brought bad luck, that she saw things, that she talked to the dead. None of it was true. Not really, but rumors grow faster than crops out in the West, and hers had roots too deep to pull out now. Once a long time ago, she had walked straight and laughed often. But that was before the fire, before her husband's scream faded into ash, and the left side of her face melted into a scar that wouldn't let her forget. Now she walked with a slight limp, unsteady on cold mornings, and her voice had grown softer, like the world had pressed its finger to her lips and told her to keep quiet. Thus, town obeyed that silence, too. On Sundays, she sat alone on the back pew while the others filled in up front. She wasn't asked to contribute food to the potlucks, nor was her name ever listed on the prayer rolls. The preacher nodded when their eyes met, but he never said her name from the pulpit. It was easier that way for them. For Martha, it was just more of the same. The children whispered when she passed, and their mothers pulled them close like the scar on her face might leap across the air and cling to their skin. She never scolded them. She remembered being young once before the fire, before the war, before the kind man with the crooked smile rode out one morning and didn't come back. He had been her everything. Now she had nothing except for the house and silence. It had been 3 years since her husband died. The war had ended months before, but death was slow to get the message. He'd gone out to check on a neighbor's wounded cattle, and all they found was his hat. Blood on the brim, arrow through the D, crown, no body, just a bad ending, and questions that still echoed louder than gunfire in her mind. Martha stopped waiting for answers. She stopped speaking much at all. The land didn't need noise. It needed hands and patience. She grew potatoes in one corner of the yard, fed the chickens in another. Days passed like wind through dry grass, slow, forgettable, and rough around the edges. One evening, she watched the sun bleed out across the horizon, a whiskey-colored sky stretching thin over the hills. That was the first time she heard it. The sharp, uneven breath of someone nearby. Before we dive deeper into the story, just a quick note. I'm Thomas, the voice behind this narration. If you're enjoying how this sounds, let me know in the comments so we can keep the same voice in future videos. Now, back to Martha. She found him just past the chicken coop. A boy no older than 10 or 11, bare-chested and shivering under a thorn bush. His left leg was wrapped in a strip of faded cloth soaked through with blood and dirt. He stared at her, eyes wild and alert like a trapped animal. Comanche. There was no mistaking it. The cut of his jaw, the bone necklace, the sharp ink markings along his shoulder. He should have run when he saw her, but he couldn't. That leg was too far gone. Martha didn't speak. She just knelt slowly, hands open. His eyes flicked between her hands, her face, and her scar. He flinched. Most people did, but he didn't try to crawl away. Maybe he saw something familiar in her brokenness. Without a word, she lifted him. He was light, fevered, and frail, and her knees nearly gave as she carried him inside. She laid him on the old cot her husband used to sleep in, pulled a damp cloth from the wash basin, and started cleaning the wound. He hissed. She shushed him gently. No names were exchanged. He didn't know her language, and she didn't know his. But pain was a language, too. And that night, they both understood it. Over the next 2 days, Martha nursed the boy quietly. She boiled herbs, crushed roots, and tried not to think about what would happen if someone from town saw the shadow in her window that didn't belong. At night, she sat in the rocking chair and watched the boy breathe. The fever broke on the second evening. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling like he'd seen it before in a dream. In the morning, he ate. In the afternoon, he smiled. It was the first smile she'd seen in months, maybe years. It cracked something in her, something she'd buried too deep for words. She didn't ask why he was alone. Didn't ask how far he'd come. She just knew he was someone's child, and someone would come looking. On the fourth morning, the wind changed. It came in from the east this time, colder, carrying a different scent. Rain maybe, or gunpowder. Martha stood on the porch with a tin cup in her hand, and the boy asleep behind her, blankets pulled up to his chin. Her eyes scanned the dirt road winding down from the hills. That was when she saw him. Not a rider, a walker. Lone figure in a brown duster, hat pulled low, step by step, slow like he had nowhere to be. Or maybe he'd already been everywhere and had the scars to prove it. She stiffened, gripped the tin tighter. Strangers didn't pass through without a reason. Not this far out. When he reached the fence, he paused. One hand rested casually on the gate latch, the other near the revolver at his side. His face was shadowed, but when he tilted his head, the light caught his jawline, rough, weathered, with a faint cut healing just beneath his cheekbone. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Not yet, just the wind between them and the sound of a rooster crowing off-key in the background. He tipped his hat slowly. "Ma'am." His voice was low, not hard, not soft, just enough to carry. He looked past her for a second, eyes drifting toward the window where the curtain had shifted. Maybe he saw the shape of the boy. Maybe he saw nothing at all. "I ain't here to take nothing," he said. "And I sure ain't here to sell you a Bible." That almost made her smile. Almost. "What are you here for?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse from disuse, but steady. He shrugged. "Heard someone out this. We was nursing a wounded dog. Figured that might be a metaphor worth looking into." She narrowed her eyes. "You a bounty hunter?" "If I was, would I say so?" Silence fell again. It stretched, but not uncomfortably. Like two people testing how long they could breathe in the same space without needing to fill it. Martha studied him. He didn't seem afraid, and more importantly, he didn't look at her scar the way others did. He looked at her like she was someone who still existed. "I'm not looking for trouble," she said. "Good," he replied. "Trouble doesn't need looking for. It tends to find folks on its own." He turned like he was ready to leave, then paused. "You got water?" She nodded, motioned with her chin toward the well behind the house. He stepped off the road and into her world without hesitation. They didn't speak much that day. He drank, tipped his hat again, and wandered off behind the barn where he tied his small bed roll under a tree. No explanation, no request, just stayed as if the land had opened its arms and let him sink in. The boy peeked at him through the curtains. Said nothing, just watched. Martha noticed how the man, despite being near, kept a careful distance. Not threatening, not too familiar. Later that afternoon, she found a bundle of fresh kindling on her porch. A small gesture, but it felt larger than it was. That night, when the wind picked up again, she didn't lock the door. What if someone saw you for who you are, not what you carry? Subscribe. One day, that story might be yours, too. The stranger's name was Ellis, or so he said. He didn't offer a last name and Martha didn't ask. She figured everyone had a reason to leave parts of themselves behind. He didn't seem like a man who lied, just one who kept his truth in a jar somewhere far from reach. By the second morning, he was helping with the fence. Said it leaned too far east, and she ought to brace it before the wind took it all the way down. His hands were worn, scarred, and calloused. But he worked like someone who didn't mind hard things. He didn't ask about the boy, didn't ask about the scar. But once after sunset, he looked at her for a long moment and said, "The world ain't kind to those it can't understand. You seem like you know that." She met his gaze. "I've learned word travels faster in small towns than lightning in a dry sky." By the third day, Mrs. Avery from the church was at the general store telling anyone who'd listen that a man was seen walking the ridge near Martha's place. Said he had Comanche on his boots. She whispered loud enough for the whole aisle to hear. "And you know she's always been strange ever since her husband disappeared." Someone else mentioned they hadn't seen the sheriff in over a week. Another swore they heard drums the night before. By sunset, 3 men had ridden out to check on the widow. Martha saw them before they reached the gate. She was shelling peas on the porch while Ellis stood quietly in the shadows of the barn. He watched them come, lean angry silhouettes kicking up dirt like they owned the ground. "Evening, Miss Martha," one called. His smile was too wide to be friendly. "Just came by to make sure you were safe. Lot of strange things happening lately." She didn't get up. "I'm fine. We heard you might have a guest. Thought we'd offer some company." Behind her, the door creaked slightly. She knew the boy was listening. Ellis stepped out, then casually wiping his hands with a rag. He looked like he'd just finished fixing a wheel, not like he was ready for a fight, but something in his eyes said otherwise. "Don't mean to interrupt," he said, "but the lady's already got company, and I reckon that's all she needs tonight." The 3 men didn't like that. Their horses shifted, hands edged toward hips, but none of them were stupid. The leader spat in the dirt. "You sure know how to pick your friends, Martha." She stared back. "So do you." They left in a cloud of resentment, and she knew they'd be back with more men and less questions. That night, the boy finally spoke. One word, quiet, from the dark corner of the room where he lay. "Father." Martha froze. Turned slowly. He pointed to the horizon where the wind had shifted again and carried the sound of distant drums. Low, steady, coming closer. They came at dusk. Not warriors, not Comanche, townsfolk, 3 women, 2 men, 1 preacher. All on borrowed righteousness. They didn't bring torches, but they didn't need to. Their voices burned just the same. "You can't shelter them, Martha." Mrs. Avery stood at the front, arms crossed, hat pinned too tight to her curls. "You of all people, after what happened to your husband." Martha stood in the doorway, hands clenched at her sides. The boy hid behind the curtain again. Ellis wasn't in sight. She wished he were. "I didn't invite you here," she said coldly. "We're not asking permission," Preacher Geller added. His Bible hung from one hand like a threat. "This land don't belong to you if you're using it to harbor sin." Martha stepped out, shutting the door behind her. "Sin," she repeated. "He's a child shot alone. He's Comanche." The words hit like stones. "And you've taken up with a drifter with a gun and no name." Mrs. Avery's voice trembled with venom. "You think people haven't noticed what happens after dark? You think you can hide behind your scars forever?" Martha flinched barely, but that was all they needed. The preacher stepped forward, raising his voice now. "You've lived in shadow for years, Martha. But this is rebellion. God sees it. We all do." She said nothing, just stared at them, letting the weight settle like ash, letting the humiliation rise in her throat like bile. Then one of the men, Tom Kinley, threw something at her feet. A rag doll, red thread, black eyes. She knew it. It had belonged to her daughter. The one they never talked about. The one buried in the far field. Her knees buckled. "You left her there," he said. "You let her die while you chase ghosts in the woods." Martha collapsed to the porch, chest heaving. Her hands reached out, not for the doll, but to brace herself from drowning in the sudden sea of memory. No one helped. No one touched her. They turned and walked away, leaving the doll in the echo of judgment in the cold dirt. The boy opened the door slowly, eyes wide, silent. She turned her face so he wouldn't see her cry. That night, she packed nothing. Just walked out the back gate into the woods, up the hills. No direction, just away. The sky darkened behind her, clouds swallowing the moon. Cold crept into her boots, numbing her feet. Still, she didn't stop. Not when the branches cut her arms. Not when the wolves howled from far-off ridges. She walked until the pain of breath reminded her she was still alive. And then she dropped. Snow came suddenly. A cruel April storm. Icy flakes coated her shoulders, her hair, her hands. She lay curled beneath a cedar tree, trembling. She didn't pray. She didn't hope. She waited for cold to take her like it had taken everything else. She didn't hear him at first. Didn't feel the gentle shift in the air. Just the warmth of a coat being laid over her shoulders, then his voice. Soft, close. I've been looking for you, Ellis. She opened her eyes slowly. He knelt beside her, rain in his hair, snow melting on his sleeves. How did you didn't say goodbye, he said. Didn't seem like you. She laughed, bitter. You don't know me. He tilted his head. Maybe, but I know running when I see it. He didn't lift her, didn't offer grand speeches or promises. He just sat quiet, took off his gloves, held her hands in his. Let her shiver, let her breathe. I'm not strong, she whispered. Her voice cracked, softer than wind. I wanted to be, but they broke. Me and I let them. Ellis didn't argue, didn't rush to disagree. He looked at her hands, scarred, blistered, weathered like old maps. People like us, he said gently. We don't get to break in public, so we break in secret and then we get up in pieces. She blinked, looked at him. I don't have any pieces left. He leaned in slightly, his breath clouding in the air. Then let me sit with you while you gather more. He carried her part of the way down, not in his arms, but by walking close, letting her lean on his shoulder. Each step felt like shedding a layer of hurt. Back at the cabin, the fire was still alive. The boy had kept it burning. He looked up when they returned, ran into the shadows, but not far. She collapsed into her chair, blankets around her. Ellis stayed across the room, silent, just there. Later that night, when the boy finally came close, he crawled into her lap without a word. She held him, rocked him gently, and outside, Ellis sat on the porch, rifle across his lap. Not because he expected trouble, but because sometimes the most dangerous thing a man can do is wait with kindness. The thaw came slow that spring, as if the land, like Martha, was unsure whether it deserved warmth again. Snow still clung to the treetops in late April, but beneath it, something stirred, a pulse, a will, a quiet fire. She woke before dawn most mornings, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. The boy was still asleep on the cot Ellis had built from scrap lumber and rope. He slept soundly now, no more flinching at every sound. No more feverish dreams. Martha stirred the embers in the hearth and added fresh wood. The soft crackle was her favorite sound these days. Not long after, Ellis would come in from the woods, axe over his shoulder, beard thick with morning frost. He never knocked. Just entered like he'd always belonged. And somehow over the weeks he did. They built things. Small things at first. A proper fence, a new hinge for the back door, shelves above the hearth. She found her hands steadier with purpose. Theo's limp didn't vanish, but her stride grew stronger. The whispers in town still floated like dust, but fewer dared approach the gate anymore. Not since Ellis started leaving carved bullets on the fence posts. A quiet warning. They started trading again. Smoked venison for flour, eggs for cloth. She didn't smile in town, but she stopped bowing her head. The boy stayed hidden during trips, but he was learning English. From Martha, from Ellis, from listening to the world without ever stepping fully into it. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the cottonwoods, Ellis leaned against the porch rail, watching Martha brush the boy's hair with fingers as gentle as spring wind. You ever think about leaving? He asked. She didn't turn. Every day, he nodded slowly. But you stay. I stay, she said. Because if I leave now, they win. He said nothing, just looked at her, the long scar down her neck catching firelight like a trail of old pain. I was ashamed of it once, she said suddenly. My limp, my face, my quiet. Thought I'd lost all the parts that made me a woman. Ellis shifted closer, voice quiet. Funny thing is, I never saw you broken. I saw you burning. She looked at him, eyes steady, tired, but lit from within now. Then maybe it's time I stopped waiting to feel whole. They started something bigger. The next morning, the land out back was flat and rich, grass thick, soil dark. Ellis found old plow pieces buried near the barn. Together, they carved lines into the earth. Horse ranch, they agreed. Or something close. The boy laughed for the first time, watching Ellis chase a stubborn colt through the creek. That laugh, bright and short and wild, stayed with Martha through the night, but fire draws shadows, and by the second week of May, they arrived. Ellis had left at dawn to buy nails and molasses. Martha stayed to tend to the boy's bruised ankle. She heard the hooves before she saw the riders. 3 of them dusty coats, flat expressions, lawmen or something like it. The lead man was tall, gray-bearded, eyes sharp with judgment. He dismounted with a familiar smirk. The kind men wore when they thought they knew everything. "Martha Walker," he said, "didn't expect to find you playing house with a savage and a ghost." She said nothing, stood firm. "You know who I am?" he asked. She nodded once. "Marshal Dent, Ellis told me." He chuckled. "Did he tell you he deserted a company wagon train? Left 2 men to die so he could vanish into the trees like a coward?" Martha didn't flinch, but the boy behind her grabbed her skirt. Dent leaned closer. "He's not who you think he is. Never was." That evening, Ellis returned to find her sitting on the porch steps, eyes red but calm. "You knew he'd come," she said. He nodded. "I figured he would. Was just a matter of time." "Is it true?" she asked. "About the wagon train?" Ellis crouched beside her, resting his hands on his knees. "It is, but not the way he tells it." She waited. "I was ordered to kill a Comanche family camp near the river. They hadn't attacked anyone, just lived too close for comfort. 2 of our men went ahead. By the time I caught up, it was already done." He swallowed. "I couldn't stomach it. I buried the dead, left my badge on the captain's saddle, and walked away." Martha looked at him, eyes full of storm and clarity. "You've been running ever since." He nodded. "Until here." The boy came outside then, holding a carved horse Ellis had whittle-led for him. He placed it in Ellis's lap silently, then climbed into Martha's arms. She didn't ask Ellis to leave, and he didn't run. They prepared that night, not for war, not for surrender, for truth. The next morning, she rode into town alone, hair braided, dressed simple, rifle strapped across her back. She walked straight into the saloon where Dent sat drinking with 2 deputies. "You want Ellis," she said. "Come take him. But know this, if you cross my land with weapons drawn, you won't leave it the same man." Dent laughed. "You threatening a marshal, Miss Walker?" "No," she replied. "I'm promising you that hill behind my cabin's got room for 3 more crosses if need be." She left before they could answer. The room had gone silent. No one followed her. Back at the ranch, Ellis was digging fence posts. The boy led a ran colt across the new field. Martha sat down beside the garden bed, planted seeds, rows and rows of them. "I thought I'd never build anything again," she said. "But maybe that was just another lie they taught me." Ellis looked over. "You're not the same woman I met." She met his gaze. "No," she said, "I'm better." They came at dawn. 50 riders, silent shadows on horseback. Not a single war cry, not a single wasted motion, just the steady thunder of hooves over thawed earth as the horizon lit with flame-orange light. The Comanche were not here for revenge. They were here for the boy. And his father rode at the front. Martha stood at the gate, rifle across her back, hard in her throat. Ellis beside her, his jaw locked but his eyes steady. Satyr boy clung to her leg, barefoot trembling but not hiding. When the riders stopped just beyond the fence, their leader dismounted, tall, broad, braided hair stray with silver. He looked not at Ellis, not at the land, but at Martha, and then slowly he looked down at his son. No one spoke, not until the boy let go of Martha's hand and stepped forward. He said something in Comanche. Small voice, steady tone. The man knelt. Martha didn't understand the words, but she understood the moment. The father gathered the boy in his arms, pressed his face into his shoulder, not like a warrior, but like a man who thought he'd lost everything. Then after a beat, the man stood and looked at Martha again. This time he nodded, not out of gratitude, not out of politeness, but out of recognition. She had saved his blood, and for that, she would always be part of his story. Then he did something no one expected. He stepped aside and gestured to the boy, letting him decide. The boy turned, looked between the tall warrior and the woman who had become his home. His eyes lingered on Martha, then on Ellis, and then he took Martha's hand. She felt his little fingers slide between hers, small, warm, certain. And in that moment, 50 warriors bowed their heads in silent agreement. No words, no ceremony, just a truth shared between people who had lost and found things too sacred to explain. They stayed until the sun cleared the ridge. Then the riders vanished back into the hills like smoke returning to the wind. 3 days later, the town gathered at the chapel, not for a funeral, for a wedding, a quiet one. No music, no flowers, just hands held over splintered pews and silent tears from those who at last saw who she really was. Ellis didn't wear a suit. She didn't wear white, but there was a necklace of hawk feathers tied around her wrist. A gift from the boy, and when they kissed, the light through the stained glass caught the scar on her neck, not to shame her, but to crown her. The townsfolk never spoke much of it. Some still turned their heads, but others, the baker, the blacksmith, even the woman who once called her cursed, began to nod in the streets, then say hello. Small cracks in old stone. The ranch grew, fences multiplied. A smokehouse was built, and in the spring, wild colts ran through the creek bed, their manes catching golden light. They named the boy Thomas after a man Ellis had once buried with his own hands, a name to honor the dead and begin again. One winter evening, Martha sat by the fire, watching Ellis mend a saddle. Tomas lay curled in a blanket, humming an old Comanche tune under his breath. Martha turned to the window, snow falling soft and slow beyond the glass. The world was quiet, whole. Ellis looked up. "You ever think we'd get here?" he asked. "No," she said, brushing her fingers across Thomas's hair. "But I stopped waiting for someone else to rescue me." Ellis reached for her hand, held it not tightly, but like he'd never let go. Outside the snow thickened, but inside the fire burned steady.